It's often said that the most dread-inspiring location within a forest is not a blazing wildfire or a dense, shadowy copse, but a marsh. This open, bright spot has sparse trees, if any at all. To the naive onlooker, it may appear to be a grassy glade, but appearances can be deceptive. An unsuspecting forager or wanderer might think it easier to traverse the glade directly, perhaps to collect berries or tiny mushrooms. Certainly, near those shrubs in the center there should be some seps or boletes. However, once the wanderer starts treading on the grass, the underlying issue is not immediately noticeable. Only when the sensation of stepping on soft cotton comes to light and dampness creeps into one's feet does the reality become evident. The shoe sinks into a shallow pool from which water cannot be collected. Another step, and the person sinks to their waist, or, thankfully, just the knees. These marshes are referred to as mires. Each subsequent movement or attempt to free oneself can be life-threatening. The more a person struggles, the more they are pulled in. Not all marshes are so deceptive. Only those formed in place of old, dried-up lakes. These lakes cease to be supplied by streams, nor do their waters get channeled through tributaries. The water becomes stagnant. The greenery-covered bottom rises, and the stillness of the water allows moss to grow, creating hummocks. Animals intuitively avoid such locations, either due to some sixth sense or personal experience. One time, as a young man, Ivanich encountered such a deceitful marsh in an unknown forest. While visiting his aunt in Siberia, he decided to explore the taiga. His aunt was unconcerned. She knew he was an ardent forager, having ventured into the forest since childhood, exploring every nook of the Moscow region for 35 years. Ivanich arrived at the forest border, swept his eyes over the open areas with bushes and scarce trees, and instantly realized it was wiser to avoid this place. A few steps in, the sense of solid ground beneath his feet vanished, and his footprints in the moss filled with water instantly. At times, just by looking at such a glade reveals that it's almost perfectly circular. This is the first indication that a boggy pond is being confronted. Bypass this place. It's fatal. Often, in these areas, the compass needle starts to spin uncontrollably. There is no supernatural element here. Circular lakes are of meteoric origin. In layman's terms, this massive depression in the Earth's surface is likely the impact site of a meteorite that crashed here thousands or perhaps millions of years ago. It's probable the meteorite is still lying at the very bottom. Most meteorites are metal-rich, containing a large amount of magnetically sensitive ore, which can significantly skew a traveler's compass reading. Ivanich was aware of these facts and chose to skirt the perimeter of the marshy land, guided by the dense forest. Suddenly, a distinctive sound pierced the silence, reminiscent of wings fluttering or water being displaced. He paused, finely tuned to the novelty in the soundscape. The sound rose again, close, as if a water bird was trying to spring into flight from the water. Seeing wild ducks is common in swamps like these. Ivanich ventured forth, supposing it was likely ducks swimming when the sound came again, this time accompanied by what seemed like hissing or whistling. He halted his trek, sidestepping toward the source of the noise, navigating the tufts of marshland with caution. Nearby, he spotted something in distress on the swamp's surface. Its reddish fur was an indisputable identifier. It was a fox. It was baffling how it had ended up ensnared in this marshy trap. Perhaps its youth and naivety led it astray, or a chase had brought it here, or a missed duck became its downfall. As the fox thrashed to free itself, it slowly disappeared under the swamp's surface. Witnessing the animal's predicament, Ivanich felt compelled to intervene. It was a situation that demanded immediate action. Surveying his surroundings, he found an abundance of felled saplings. He gathered them, linking the ends in a crisscross configuration akin to a hang glider, and laid it across the marsh's surface. Braving the cold swamp, Ivanich laid prone between the trunks and embarked on his rescue mission, inching toward the fox. His clothing clung wetly to his skin, discomforting him. Yet, leveraging the structural integrity of the intersecting saplings and hauling himself forward, Ivanich drew closer to the distressed animal. As he neared the fox, it stopped resisting. It was almost fully submerged, just its snow-white face and ebony snout poking above the surface. Its nostrils flared rapidly, and a desperate plea reflected in its gaze. Summoning his strength, Ivanich lunged for the final stretch of the rescue mission. Outstretching his arm, he latched onto the fox's scruff, yanking it upwards. The vortex of splashes and the gurgling sound of water receding could do nothing to muffle the telltale sigh of the fox that marked its salvation. Now, it was time for the return journey. Ivanich hoisted the fox onto his back, instantly feeling his attire getting soaked again from the freezing water. The spent creature, perhaps still in disbelief over its unlikely deliverance, made no attempt to leap off or run away. Thus, they ventured to the edge of the marshland, and Ivanich steadily rose to his feet. The little fox seemed hesitant to dismount. Like a feline, it climbed over his back and nestled on his neck like a damp scarf. He marched with the fox wrapped around his neck all the way to his town. He could have kindled a fire in the wilderness to dry his clothes, but he wasn't sure how to shield himself from the mosquito swarm, ready to feast on him. He left his tent behind and hadn't ventured far from his aunt's dwelling. The fox remained motionless throughout the journey, laboring with every breath. It seemed she had ingested water, which ended up in her lungs. Only as they neared the town did she seem increasingly agitated and twitchy, perhaps due to hearing the distant barking of dogs and identifying the scent of human settlement. Ivanich extended a hand and gently brushed the fox's back to ease her tension. The saved creature settled down. His aunt gasped when she saw her nephew stride into the yard in sodden clothes, bearing a damp creature on his shoulders. She slapped her hands together, exclaiming, "Others come from the wilderness, bearing fruits of nature, and here's one with fur draped around his neck." Ivanich responded with a grin, gently removing the creature. "It's indeed quite a sight." "Goodness, she's alive." Aunt slapped her hands together once again. "Of course she's alive. What did you expect? Would I roam the wilderness with a lifeless fox adorning my shoulders?" The nephew quipped humorously. Meanwhile, the fox gasped and struggled for air. She tried to stand, scanned her surroundings, attempted a step, before collapsing again. After a couple more attempts, she let out a raspy cough. Ivanich quickly changed into dry attire and examined the woodland dweller. It turned out she had a fractured front paw. How it happened would remain an enigma, perhaps during a hasty chase, or due to the struggle in the miry marshland. One could only speculate. Ivanich requested his aunt for a piece of cloth to bind the injury and created a snug wrap for the little paw. That was the extent of help they could offer the fox. The distant Siberian town they resided in didn't have veterinary care. The fox was exhausted and weak. Finding herself enveloped by warmth and a semblance of safety, she drifted into slumber, refusing any attempts to feed her while occasionally gasping and coughing in her sleep. She'd wake up, look around, and quickly return to her dreams. They could only wish her youthful vitality would help her overcome this. It was clear she was quite young. Ivanich kept vigil by her side throughout the night before surrendering to sleep in the early morning. When she had almost stopped coughing, and it seemed like all the water was out of her lungs, the fox managed to breathe easily. However, the next day, she refused to eat or drink anything. The little creature didn't attempt to get up. Instead, she slept continuously. For 3 days, this situation continued, with the fox spending most of her time asleep. As the saying goes, sleep is the best medicine. Ivanich, therefore, stayed by her side for the rest of his time off. His aunt always griped, "You need to find yourself a wife, someone to build a life with, rather than fussing over this flea-ridden furball." She had hoped Ivanich would find a local woman to marry, but he had no interest in looking at anyone else, focused solely on tending to the fox. It turned out the fox's paw hadn't healed perfectly. While she recovered from her other injuries, she hobbled around the garden. She ate heartily, drank water and milk, and duck eggs boiled just right were her particular favorite. Yet, with that defective paw, there was no way to send her back into the wild. She wouldn't be able to fend for herself and find food. Soon, Ivanich's break was coming to an end, and he had to return to Moscow. His aunt became reluctant to the idea of leaving the fox behind. Therefore, Ivanich decided to bring the fox along with him to Moscow. The fox fancied settling comfortably on Ivanich's shoulder. She'd eat a bit, wander around, and then climb back onto his shoulder again. Ivanich humorously remarked how he wouldn't need a winter coat this year, since he'd stay warm with his living fur collar. He planned to wander around Moscow, to work, and to stores, with the fox draped on his shoulders. Funnily enough, he named her Vorotnik, after his aunt's continual reference to her as the collar. During the train ride to Moscow, Ivanich housed Vorotnik in a pet carrier to evade drawing attention, splurging on a first-class ticket for added privacy. When asked momentarily about what he was carrying inside, he told the passengers about the fox. Little Vorotnik sat on his shoulders for the majority of the trip, peering out the window pensively. At night-time, she would calmly retreat into the carrier placed under the seat. During stops along the way, Ivanich would take her out for a walk on the platform, just like one would take a dog. The conductor, Nadenka, was particularly charmed by the fox. Young and pretty, her fiery red hair matched Vorotnik's fur perfectly on Ivanich's shoulders. At first glance, Nadenka thought the fox was indeed a collar, as she was so peaceful. Whenever possible, Nadenka would tempt Vorotnik with some savory treat, and, surprisingly, Vorotnik graciously accepted the treats from her hand. Throughout the journey, Ivanich and Nadenka developed a bond of friendship. In Moscow, the two continued to spend time together and soon tied the knot, much to the elation of their elderly Siberian aunt. It was thanks to the fox they rescued from the Siberian marsh that Ivanich's personal journey found its course. Had he returned from his vacation alone, he likely would not have struck up a conversation with Nadenka. Such is the striking story. Thank you for staying engaged until the end. Don't forget to follow through, thumbs up, and click the alert bell so you won't miss any new videos. Your genuine comments are deeply appreciated. Best wishes to you all.